Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. In this episode, we're taking a moment to reflect on the 80th anniversary of D-Day, an event that marked the beginning of the end for Nazi occupation in Europe. But as we honor the sacrifices of those who stormed the beaches of Normandy, we must also turn our attention to a pressing issue of our time, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and what NATO should be doing about it. This past week, as the world marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day, a significant presence was felt in France. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Ukraine's president, has been making waves in Europe, and other world leaders, in stride with him, made some big announcements. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
France has taken the lead in rallying Western nations to form a coalition aimed at sending military instructors to Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron, who recently met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has expressed his desire to organize the coalition.
For efficiency purposes, we wish to have a coalition, and a number of parties have given their go-ahead. France will not go alone, and I can tell you, I know we are not alone. In the upcoming days, we'll be finalizing the largest possible coalition to implement Ukraine's demands and the framework that I've just reminded.
The mission's focus is to expedite the training of Ukrainian soldiers, with particular emphasis on demining and maintenance of military equipment. The plan, however, has met with resistance from several European Union countries, notably Germany, Italy and Spain, expressing concerns over the potential escalation of the conflict and the risk of being drawn into the war with Russia.
We support President Macron's initiative to send instructors to Ukraine. By the way, it simply shortens the duration of training. So what's the issue? Many NATO countries trained our military on their territories. The difference is that this way, it's shorter and more effective.
The proposed coalition aims to operate under the existing EU mission in Ukraine, which may require a mandate change during the summer review and November extension. European diplomatic circles acknowledge the strong military rationale for training Ukrainian troops within the country, ensuring that the training aligns with the needs of the Ukrainian armed forces.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. As Vladimir Putin continues his aggressive campaign in Ukraine, there's a growing fear that countries like Poland and the Baltic states could be next on his hit list. So, what should NATO do? Well, some suggest that instead of waiting for Russian forces to knock on their doors, these countries should send troops to Ukraine now to force Russia to withdraw and keep Putin at bay. But before any soldiers start packing their bags for the Kyiv-bound train, let's take a step back and talk this through. French President Emmanuel Macron, in a speech last month, reminded us of the stark reality. Russia will be here tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. His point? Well, it's easier to deal with Putin's forces on Ukrainian soil, where the Ukrainian army is already doing the heavy lifting, than to wait for them to reach NATO territory. And with the upcoming Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland and NATO's 75th anniversary meeting in Washington, there might be a window of opportunity for a ceasefire. But, and this is a big but, Ukraine's Western allies shouldn't pressure President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to negotiate with someone as untrustworthy as Putin. Instead, the focus should be on strengthening Ukraine's position to ensure the peace and security they deserve. Time is not on Ukraine's side, though. Militarily, they're fighting hard, but the specter of blackouts and a harsh winter looms large. The country's very survival is at stake, and NATO membership would be the best security guarantee. So, what's the alternative? Deploying NATO troops in Ukraine, but not in a combative role. Now, this would involve a coalition of willing NATO members like Estonia, France, Lithuania, and Poland, countries that have already shown their readiness to support Ukraine. Other members like Slovakia and Hungary, Germany, and Spain are likely to sit this one out. Anyways, the deployment wouldn't cover areas occupied by Russia, but rather the parts of Ukraine that have never been claimed by Russia. This isn't about conceding any grounds to Putin, but rather about preventing further losses and freeing up Ukrainian troops for actual combat. These non-combat roles include training Ukrainian soldiers, clearing minefields, and maintaining equipment. But let's be clear, if Russian forces attack foreign troops in Ukraine, there should be immediate reprisals. Ultimately, this isn't about drawing a rigid red line, but about sending a clear message to Putin. Don't mess with foreign personnel on Ukrainian soil. If this proposal seems provocative or escalatory, it's because Putin has been provoking NATO for years. As Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas recently said, if Russia wants to attack, it will, regardless of NATO's actions. And these actions might just help end this war of aggression where it started. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Sergej Sumlenny, Director of the European Resilience Initiative Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, and thank you for having invited me today.
So we are working out the topic of NATO's relation with the war in Ukraine at the moment. Of course, we know that Macron has announced the supplement of the Mirage fighter jets to Ukraine, as well as various countries announcing the green light for Ukraine to use their weaponry to strike inside of Russian soil. However, we're observing also the European Parliament election that just took place, and there have been a little bit of political shape-up. Can you help us understand whether or not this will change the policy going forward?
Well, we do not see the direct changes of this policy towards Russia-Ukrainian war because of the European elections themselves. The European elections do not have a direct impact on the foreign policy of the member states, and we know that we have some change in France with the parliamentary elections being announced by President Macron. But if you look at Germany, for example, I would say that the result of the elections would change the situation even for better for Ukraine, because the strongest party is the Christian Democratic Party, which is the strongest supporter of Ukraine, and the leader of the Christian Democrats, Friedrich Merz, has very clearly said yesterday that his party is the winner of the election with over 30%. And that he sees this Russia's war is not only as a war against Ukraine, but as a war against Germany too. And there is not another way to win this war than to militarily defeat Vladimir Putin. And there will be no German Chamberlain, he added. So a very clear step. Also, the position of the Social Democratic Party, a party of Chancellor Olaf Scholz, have been significantly weakened. They have got 14% of the votes, the weakest result in the history of the Social Democratic Party. And that can be a sign that the policy of Chancellor Scholz, this one step forward, two steps back, or vice versa, it doesn't lead to a success. And maybe it can lead also to a change in the mood of the party itself when people start asking, is this policy, which Chancellor Scholz calls Besonnenheit, or way of reason, if it is really a way of reason, maybe it is a way of cowardness and indecisiveness.
Right, a very good argument to be made there. And we're also wondering whether or not recent Ukrainian successes on the battlefield, namely being able to repel the Russians from the Kharkiv region, be it pushing out the Russians from the Volchansk region, or even a direct strike inside Belgorod and the attack on one of those Su-57 fighter jets. These, do they have anything to do with the United States as well as other NATO countries greenlighting Ukraine's capabilities to strike inside Russian soil?
Absolutely, there is a direct connection. And we know that the US, American, and German provide weapons like HIMARS missiles have already been used to decimate Russia's launching batteries in Belgorod region across the Kharkiv oblast of Ukraine. And it helped to improve significantly the situation in Kharkiv, as Russians could not strike Ukrainian soil without any consequence for them. We have also seen the first strike in the history of this war conducted by a Ukrainian jet against a Russian commando center in Belgorod Oblast, and that is also a significant change. What you have mentioned, these strikes against the Russian military air base, where one Sukhoi 57 jet, the most modern jet of the Russian army, have been damaged or maybe even destroyed. We don't know clear assessment of the consequence of that hit. But these strikes are quite, I would say, from a different liga. And these strikes, which have been conducted by Ukrainian drones, And Ukrainian drones are Ukraine produced. There were no limitations on usage of these drones, and the Ukrainians have already used these drones against high value military targets in Russia, strategic aviation air base in Engels on Middle Volga, or Russian radars, including anti-missile radars far in Russian center areas, and also Russian refineries and also other Russian targets. So here we don't have as a direct consequence of the US-American green light on strike in Russia territory, but in combination with other means like HIMARS, ATACMS. And overall, I would say a much more tolerant way of the US to judge these strikes or to condemn them or to support them, we can see significant change on the battlefield.
Right, and of course, there has been a rhetoric floating around the internet space or some more niche media about this green light being a very escalatory action. Of course, whenever these type of things go through, there's been murmurs around. Can you help us break down these arguments and what, if in your opinion, these are sound and valid arguments?
You mean the argument about that the strikes can lead to Russian escalatory politics that escalate the situation? Right. Well, we don't see how Russia can escalate. We need to understand when Russia doesn't use such certain sort of weapons or certain tactics, it's not because they say, oh, we want to be good guys, we want to show goodwill gesture, we don't want to escalate. No, it's just because they cannot, technically or politically. Russia was not allowed to conduct large-scale aviation strikes against Ukrainian cities. They have tried to do it early this war. They were repelled over Chernihiv and over other regions. They would gladly turn Kyiv into new Aleppo. They just can't. So they don't full strike with their aviation Kyiv, not because they don't want to, or they don't, or they want to give the Ukrainians some way to save their lives. No, they just can't. Where they can do it, they do it, like gliding bombs usage of a Kharkiv region and along the front line. Or there can be political limitations, like the Russians gladly threaten with usage of nuclear weapons, but they don't dare to use it because they know that the political blackmailing with the nukes brings them much more than a usage of the nuke, because the first usage of the nuke would completely turn away from them their only allies, China and India, and would allow practically the Western powers to unleash the full force of the NATO against Russia, because that's not what you do in the modern world. You don't use nukes. So they don't use nukes not because they want to be kind guys, but because they know the consequence. All other things which they can do, they do. They kill civilians, they torture prisoners, they destroy dams like Kakhovka Dam. They attack dams like the Zaporizhia Dam. They even use chemical weapon. Like many people say, oh, it's only tear gas. No, tear gas is banned by international convention as a chemical weapon, right? Because on the battlefield, tear gas is being used to force the soldiers to leave their trenches, to go outside where they will be killed by artillery strike, for example. And the Russians use it not in one like particular area of this front line, but on the whole front line for months and on large scale. And there are a lot of evidence of that. There are canisters. There are even Russian videos broadcasted by Russian TV when the Russians brag that they use tear gas to gas Ukrainians and to force them to leave their areas. So it's a breach of UN Convention on Ban on Chemical Weapons. Once again, where Russians can escalate, they escalate. They don't escalate only when they are forced not to escalate. And that is how we stop them. We provide Ukraine with more arms and with permission to use this arm.
All right, and coming back to Macron, do you think that his stance of, somewhat hawkish stance now against Russia when it comes to this war is a very popular one within its French population? Or does the recent electoral result indicate that maybe the French people aren't fully behind it?
Well, we see, of course, this significant increase of support by the French population towards Marine Le Pen, but it's not related like to Ukraine-Russian war. We know that this is a very long conflict with inside of France, and it was even before Macron. It was during Sarkozy and François Hollande and the others. So it's not just because of this war, and there are a lot of topics which Marine Le Pen uses in that discussion. It's immigration, it's economy, it's the role of France within the European Union. What Macron is trying to do now, he tries to profile himself as a leader of Europe, and he tried to be a leader of Europe on the field of diplomacy earlier this war when he called Putin practically daily. And he tried to be a leader of Europe, being the person who negotiates with China. Remember his trips to Beijing. And now he tries to do it with France being a military leader of at least Western Europe. It fits perfectly to Macron's idea of strategic autonomy. It fits perfectly to his idea of providing a French military-industrial complex with more influence within Europe, like that French tanks. So to speak easily, like French tanks and not German tanks would be bought in Europe. And also, of course, to provide the image of a decisive person and to be a contrary to Olaf Scholz, who does not lead and is not ready to lead even when he's been asked to lead. I don't think that here the challenges on the domestic field would change Macron's policy. He has already changed his mind once, like switching from diplomacy to a brutal force, and I don't think he will come back to diplomacy because that would demonstrate that he is weak and undecisive. I think he will go until the end and either win on the end or he will be forced to leave.
Right, tricky indeed. And we have seen the cost of indecisiveness, so let's hope things turn for the better. Thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it. And thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you so much for this invitation.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. U.S. President Joe Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron have agreed to use the profits from frozen Russian assets to aid Ukraine. This agreement marks a significant step in international efforts to support Ukraine amid ongoing Russian invasion.
The newly announced plan involves leveraging around 260 billion euros of frozen Russian funds to secure a substantial loan for Ukraine. These funds, most of which are held within the EU, generate an annual profit of 2.5 to 3.5 billion euros. The US stated that these profits are not contractually owed to Russia, thus representing a windfall that can be used to support Ukraine's needs. Despite Russia's objections labeling the move as a theft, the US and France, along with their G7 partners, are pushing forward with the initiative. The funds are expected to be allocated primarily to Kyiv's military requirements, with the first tranche of revenue from the frozen assets anticipated to be transferred to Ukraine this summer.
For the sixth time in 3 years, Bulgaria is attempting to establish a stable government. Over the weekend, the country held national parliamentary elections alongside the EU-wide EP elections, with the center-right emerging as a frontrunner.
Bulgaria's political scene has been reshaped by the recent snap parliamentary elections. According to early exit polls, former Prime Minister Boyko Borisov's center-right GERB party has emerged as the frontrunner. The party has reportedly secured approximately 26% of the vote, placing it well ahead of other contenders. This lead could potentially usher Borisov back into a position of power, despite facing corruption accusations from the opposition. Borisov, however, has expressed skepticism about the likelihood of forming a new government, given the fragmented voting patterns observed early in the day. As the poorest member of the European Union, Bulgaria's need for a robust government is pressing. The nation stands at a crossroads, with aspirations to join the Eurozone and fully integrate into Europe's Schengen area. Yet these goals remain elusive amidst the political deadlock that has delayed crucial reforms in the flow of EU funds into the country's infrastructure.
The leaders of Serbia and the Serb population within Bosnia and Herzegovina called for the unity of ethnic Serbs throughout the region during a rally in Belgrade. both leaders signed what they call the Declaration of the Protection of National and Political Rights and the Common Future of the Serbian People.
Hundreds of Serbs gathered at Republic Square in Belgrade to express the unity of the Serbian nation. The demonstrators included both Serbian citizens and Serbs from Republika Srpska, the predominantly Serbian autonomous entity within Bosnia and Herzegovina, whose leader has recently voiced threats of secession. During the assembly, Serbian President Vučić emphasized that the declaration's language was meticulously crafted, focusing on Kosovo and adhering to the Dayton Agreement, which concluded the Yugoslav War in the mid-1990s. Notably, the declaration avoided any mention of separation from Bosnia. Dodik, who met with Russian President Vladimir Putin just days before the assembly, expressed that the declaration supports the interests of the Serbian nation. While committed to the Dayton Accords, Dodik hinted that Republika Srpska might soon seek Serbia's support to resolve its status. The assembly and its outcomes arrive amidst heightened tensions following the United Nations approval of a resolution to annually commemorate the 1995 Srebrenica genocide, a move criticized by Serbia.
The political tension in Armenia is escalating. Opposition figure Archbishop Bagrat Galsenian has urged the nation to engage in continuous protests aimed at toppling Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's government.
Addressing a large crowd in Yerevan's Republic Square, Archbishop Galstanian announced that the protests would begin on June 10th and continue for 4 days. He implored the National Assembly to hold a special session to discuss the government's resignation and the formation of a new administration. The opposition, led by Galstanian, has long been vocal in demanding the resignation of the Pashinyan government. The call to action comes in response to the government's territorial concessions to Azerbaijan, which have sparked widespread discontent among the populace. The Prime Minister, however, backed by a two-thirds majority in Parliament, has remained firm in his stance, rejecting calls for his resignation over the border deal with Azerbaijan. This agreement involved the handover of 4 villages that were part of Soviet Azerbaijan, but were given over to Armenia as a part of a border delimitations following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news update and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.